The nature of water. The young monk Kaito walked alongside his master on a narrow mountain path. They had left the temple at dawn, with no apparent destination. Kaito did not dare ask, for he knew that Master Daisetsu spoke only when necessary. After several hours of silence, they arrived at a river with crystal-clear waters gently flowing between the rocks. Daisetsu stopped at the shore and gazed at the constant flow of the water. Kaito, who had been restless for days with questions he could not answer, finally broke the silence. "Master, what is truth?" Daisetsu did not respond immediately. Instead, he pointed to the river and said, "Look at the water. It flows without resistance, reflects everything without attachment, and never clings to anything. Learn from it." Kaito furrowed his brow. The answer seemed simple, but he felt there was something deeper in his master's words. He knelt at the shore and dipped his hand into the water, letting the current pass through his fingers. "The water follows its course without stopping," he whispered to himself. Daisetsu observed his disciple with a faint smile and then, without saying more, began walking downstream. Kaito hurried to follow him, his mind restless with what he had just heard. Kaito followed his master downstream, his mind full of questions. Each time he tried to understand the meaning of Daisetsu's words, his thoughts became tangled like branches caught in the current. After a while, they reached a point where the river met a large rock. Instead of stopping, the water divided into small streams that flowed around the obstacle, rejoining further down as if nothing had happened. Daisetsu stopped and pointed to the rock. "Observe, Kaito. What does the water do when it encounters an obstacle? It doesn't fight against it," Kaito replied after a moment of reflection. "It surrounds it and moves on." Daisetsu nodded. "So too is truth. It does not cling to one path nor fight against the inevitable. It does not try to force its way, but finds its natural course." Kaito looked at the rock again. He thought of all the times he had tried to fight against his own thoughts, clinging to certainties that crumbled away. "But Master," he said after a while, "aren't there times when the water stops? Doesn't it get caught in whirlpools or stagnate in a lake?" Daisetsu smiled and began walking again. "Come, let's follow the river a bit more." Kaito walked silently beside his master, following the course of the river. Soon, they arrived at a small pond where the water appeared still, trapped between rocks and vegetation. The young monk pointed to the pond. "Here, the water has stopped, Master. It doesn't flow. Has it lost its nature?" Daisetsu bent down and immersed his hand in the still water. He then lifted it and let the drops slip through his fingers. "Look closely, Kaito," he said in a calm voice. "The water here seems still, but if you observe patiently, you will see that it is still moving, even if imperceptibly. It has not forgotten its nature. Sooner or later, it will find an exit and begin to flow again." Kaito furrowed his brow, trying to understand. "So, even when truth seems hidden, it is still there?" Daisetsu nodded. "That's right. Truth doesn't disappear, just as water never ceases to be water. Sometimes we just have to wait." Kaito stared at the pond, watching small ripples tremble on the surface with the breeze. For the first time, he felt that his restless thoughts could also calm down if he stopped resisting them. Without saying more, Daisetsu continued on, allowing his disciple to meditate on the lesson. As they walked, the sound of the water filled the air with its incessant murmur. Kaito, still absorbed in his thoughts, broke the silence. "Master, if water flows without resistance, does that mean it never struggles?" Daisetsu stopped next to a narrow gorge where the river fell into a waterfall. The water crashed with force, hitting the rocks with a thunderous sound. "Doesn't the water struggle here?" asked Kaito, pointing to the waterfall. The master smiled and shook his head. "It is not a struggle, it is surrender," he replied. The water does not resist its descent. It falls because it is its nature. It accepts every form it takes without attachment or fear. Kaido looked at the waterfall with new eyes. He thought of all the times he had feared change, all the times he had clung to what could no longer be. "If I cling, I suffer," he murmured to himself. Daisetsu nodded, as if he had heard his thoughts. "Truth, Kaido, is not something you can possess. Like water, you can only experience it in the flow of the present moment." The young monk closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the current of his own existence within. Without saying more, they continued on their way, leaving the waterfall behind and entering the forest. The path led them to a quieter area of the forest where the river flowed calmly. Kaido observed how the water clearly reflected the sky and the trees. "Master," he said after a while, "the water reflects everything around it, but it does not cling to anything. Is that also part of the truth?" Daisetsu knelt by the river and touched the surface with the tips of his fingers. The reflection of the sky broke into waves that slowly spread. "The water does not choose what to reflect," he replied. "It does not cling to the image of the sun or reject the shadow of the clouds. It simply lets everything pass through it." Kaido stared at the water. He thought about how his own mind often clung to thoughts, memories, and emotions, as if afraid to let them go. "So," he whispered, "truth is to accept everything without attachment." Daisetsu smiled softly. "Accept, but without getting trapped. Like the water, let everything reflect in you, but do not become the reflection." Kaido nodded slowly. He looked at his own image in the water and, for the first time, understood that it was nothing more than a fleeting reflection in the vast flow of existence. The wind blew, causing the leaves to fall gently onto the current. Without resistance, the water embraced them and carried them along, without asking where they came from or where they were going. The young monk closed his eyes and smiled. To flow without resistance. Daisetsu stood up and continued walking, with Kaido following him in silence. The sun began to descend on the horizon, painting the sky in golden and orange hues. The river, serene and eternal in its flow, reflected the colors of the sunset without holding onto them. Kaido and Daisetsu arrived at a wooden bridge that crossed the water. The master stopped in the middle of it and looked toward the current. "Kaido," he said, "tell me, where does this river begin and where does it end?" The young monk contemplated the constant flow beneath his feet. "I don't know, master," he replied after a moment. "Maybe it started in the mountains and will end in the sea. But even then, the water will continue its cycle, returning to the sky and coming back to the earth." Daisetsu nodded with satisfaction. "That's right. Water never dies, it just changes form. And the same happens with truth. It is not something fixed or unchanging, but it flows with life itself." Kaido looked at the river with new understanding. "So, if truth is like water, I can never catch it, only experience it." The master smiled. "And by experiencing it, you become it." A deep silence settled between them. The young monk felt how his mind, always restless, now flowed with the rhythm of the river. There was no need to hurry or cling. Only the present remained, eternal and infinite in its flow. The evening breeze began to blow gently, and Daisetsu resumed walking. Kaido followed him, feeling that something inside him had changed forever. Night fell over the forest as Kaido and Daisetsu continued walking in silence. The sound of the river continued to accompany them, a constant murmur that seemed to whisper invisible truths. The young monk felt his mind lighter, as if the current of the water had washed away his worries. But one last doubt remained in his heart. "Master," he said, stopping, "if truth is like water, always changing and flowing without resistance, how can anyone find stability in it?" Daisetsu looked at his disciple with serene eyes. Then, without saying a word, he picked up a stone from the ground and threw it into the river. The stone sank quickly, disappearing beneath the surface. Look at the water, Kaito. Has its essence changed because of the stone that fell into it? Kaito observed. The current was disturbed for only a moment before it regained its natural flow, as if nothing had happened. No, master. It is still water. Daisetsu nodded. That's right. Stability doesn't come from clinging to something fixed, but from accepting change without losing your essence. Like the water, you can adapt to everything, but you never cease to be yourself. Kaito closed his eyes and let those words settle within him. He finally understood that truth was not a destination to reach, but a path to walk moment by moment, without resistance and without fear. Daisetsu resumed his walk. Kaito, feeling lighter than ever before, followed him, with the certainty that, like water, his spirit would always find its way. The path led them back to the temple, where the paper lanterns swayed gently with the night breeze. Kaito and Daisetsu crossed the threshold in silence, still feeling the presence of the river in each of their steps. Before retiring to his room, Kaito looked at his master and bowed respectfully. Thank you, master. I now understand that truth is not something I can possess, but something I must become. Daisetsu looked at his disciple with a faint smile and nodded. There is nothing to understand, Kaito. Just flow. The young monk smiled. He no longer needed any more answers. The truth was in every step, in every breath, in every moment that passed without attachment or resistance. That night, for the first time in a long time, Kaito slept in peace, with the sound of water resonating inside him, gently guiding him as it always had.